Are you struggling with deciding whether going through graduate school to get a PhD is actually right for you? In this video today, we are going through part 2 of the series, Should I Get a PhD? And today we are talking all about the pros and the cons of actually going through the process of getting your PhD. So if you want to know more about what are the pros of having a PhD and what you can do afterwards, check out part 1 in this series on Is Getting a PhD Worth It? So today I'm going to give you 3 pros and 3 cons that I experienced in the actual going through grad school process to get my PhD. If you don't know me, I am Elena Reister and I got my PhD in chemistry. And now I have this channel that is all about the graduate school life, both getting into graduate school, going through graduate school, and then post-grad life and finding work after graduate school. All right, so let's get into that first con. So my first con of actually the graduate school process is that it can be very stressful going through grad school. And this is probably one that's really familiar to a lot of people, and sometimes if you are someone who really just can't deal with the stress, it may not be worth going through. But it's also important to note that that stress kind of increases and decreases at different points in times. And so for me, going through my graduate school, I had really high points in times when I was working on things under deadlines or having to give presentations because I get really nervous through presentations, where I also had lower stressful times when I was simply just working on, kind of the everyday process and I didn't have any looming deadlines over me. While we still talk about grad school being stressful, we also have to remember that what would you be doing if you weren't doing grad school? And that would probably be that you were working some kind of job. Depending on the job that you have, it might even be more or less stressful than grad school. So after I left grad school and started my postdoc, because of the different types of management styles, my postdoc was actually much more stressful for me than getting my PhD was, even though I wasn't working towards that PhD. So to counteract that, the first pro that I want to talk about is actually having a flexible schedule. And so while you may think that graduate students are working, 14, 15 hours a day every day, that's generally not true in the majority of cases. And so for me, one of the things I really enjoyed was, especially once I got out of the coursework part of my PhD, that on certain days I didn't have anything scheduled. And for me personally, my advisor was someone that didn't particularly count the time that I was working and just wanted to see results. So there were some days that I could just stay at home all day and be able to either work from home or just kind of take a day and relax, instead of, when you're working an industry job and you have to work a 9 to 5. This is also helpful when you have things like doctor's appointments come up, that you can just take your time out of your day and it's not like you're having to clock in and out or trying to ask your boss for time off for those things. So you have a really flexible schedule where when you have coursework or specific meetings, you will definitely have to be there at a specific time. But outside of that, you have a more flexible schedule. And I talk a little bit more about this in this video right up here. So the con number 2 is that your advisor really controls your life when you're in graduate. And so this is a little bit different than whether you're an undergrad or when you're in industry having a boss, because in graduate school, whether you get your degree is basically research-based, and how much research is expected for that degree differs depending on what advisor you have. Also, your work day and other things about how you can spend your time is also dictated by your advisor. So there are several different advisors that are more interested in results than they are your time. So they don't really care when you're working or how much you're working, as long as you're not missing meetings that are important and also are regularly producing results from your research. And so depending on who your advisor is can greatly change that aspect of your life and what you can do with your time. Another reason that can cause a lot of stress about your advisor controlling your life is that your degree, again, is based on research. And so your advisor can make choices on whether you've completed enough research or not. And also, getting jobs after your degree are oftentimes based on your advisor's recommendations and your publication record. And so if you have an advisor that is not regularly working on your publications, then that can actually hinder you going out from your PhD or even getting your PhD, even when you're trying to do everything in your power to get the research done and to write those publications. And so this is one reason why a lot of graduate students don't know when they're going to graduate, simply because they don't have the control that you had as an undergraduate in your timeline and when you get to graduate. To go off that, the second pro of going to graduate school and getting your PhD is actually traveling. In my graduate school experience, I traveled for multiple different conferences. So I got to go basically for free to San Diego, Atlanta, Indianapolis, and twice to Monterey, California. And all of these times I was traveling for conferences. And so the downside to that is I didn't get to do a lot of sightseeing when I was there or actually enjoying the traveling, because I had to be at a conference basically the whole time I was there. But I did actually get to travel and see a little bit of those cities by being able to go there. So it's a little bit dependent on how your conferences are set up and where they're set up, and also your research progress on how many of those conferences you get to go to. On the other hand, because you are in grad school, you tend to have a little bit more of a flexible schedule compared to having an industry job and the amount of time you can actually take off. And so on certain breaks, while taking every break off is not the best idea like you might in undergrad, on certain breaks we were available to go and travel. And so I also took multiple personal trips that were more vacation that I might not have been able to take if I was working a regular industry job, because I wouldn't have had all the time I had to take those trips. So I took multiple trips to Florida, to Seattle, and I went to Chicago during my 3.5 years as a PhD student. Going into the third major con of the process of getting your PhD is definitely the limited pay and your living expenses. And so if you don't know, if you are a science and most likely a social science and sometimes even a humanity PhD student, you can actually get paid to get your PhD. And so you tend to get paid through graduate teaching or graduate research or fellowships. Those are the three ways that you can actually get paid and not have to pay tuition. So they will do something called a tuition remission. However, these pays are actually very low compared to what you would expect in an actual industry job with your bachelor's. And so I got around $24,000 a year as my stipend to pay for everything I would need. Versus if I was working an industry job, I would probably be getting paid more, between $40,000 and $50,000 a year. But if you also include the amount that they are paying in your tuition, you actually find that it does about equal out, but that actually doesn't help you in your current living situation. And so you tend to have to live a not so glamorous life. But as I said, I was able to save up for trips that I wanted to take, going to Florida, Chicago, and Seattle. And so you still will have disposable income, especially depending on where you decide to do your PhD. If you live in a lower cost of living place, that might actually be a little bit better to do your PhD, because you're going to have a nicer living situation than you would if you live in a higher cost of living place. So that's one thing you may want to take into consideration if you're looking at where you want to do your PhD, is what their stipends are and then also what the living costs are there. And going into the third pro of getting your PhD and actually going through that process is the community and the friendships. And so my closest friends now are the people that I worked with in graduate school. And so getting to actually relate to people who understand the graduate school experience, and whether those are people inside your own lab or people in your cohort or even people that are out of your department that you meet through different networking events or collaborations. These partnerships can actually really helpful, not only for just having friendships in graduate school, but also for networking once you get outside of graduate school. And so that is definitely one of the biggest pros that I have for going through graduate school, is the networking and the friendships that you will make. Because you're going through such a stressful event together, you tend to make, more close friendships than you would if you were just going through, working together at an industry or job or something like that. So if you're a person who actually truly enjoys doing research and learning, then graduate school is going to be a funner experience for you. And if that's your reason, like I talked about in part 1 of this series, then it is a really good idea to go to graduate school. The reason I didn't talk about those types of pros and cons is because I wanted to give a wider scope of what that process is actually like. If you are someone who does not enjoy doing research or going through classwork or learning more, then you may want to consider not doing a graduate school experience, right? So whatever side of that you're on, I feel like that's an often pro or con that people talk about, but really it depends on who you are and what that looks like. So I really hope this video gave you a really good idea of some different pros and cons. And if you really liked the pros and the cons are something that you understand and you'll be able to deal with, then graduate school just might be right for you, and getting that PhD could be a really good experience for you. And if you have different pros or cons that you're going through in graduate school, then feel free to comment below and we can kind of talk about, what the different experiences that you may have in graduate school. If you liked this video and found it useful, please hit the thumbs up button below and hit that subscribe button below so that you can get updates whenever I post new videos on graduate school. Next week, part 3 of this series will be coming out all about answering the top 3 questions on whether it's actually a good idea for you to go to graduate school and how that experience is going to look like for you. If you can't wait till next week to get more videos, you can check out these 2 videos right here, and I will see you guys next week.